Hello, everyone. Welcome to another one of our videos at the Community Wellness channel, Watts Community Wellness channel. Today we have another podcast-style conversation, which we're really hoping will be very informative. I'm very excited for the conversation. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's very important for these times, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Shakayla's here with me, but as our host, and we also have a special guest. I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more, but Dave Carr, do you like to?
Sure. Hey, my name's Dave Carr. I've been in education for 27 years as a teacher, as a coordinator, a teacher coach, a principal, and I'm actually back in the classroom as a teacher this year.
So I want to start off definitely by acknowledging thank you, not only for being here, but just right now your dedication to education. I know we spoke before this of returning to the classroom during what is everyone's first year of teaching, for the most part, as we discussed in this completely new and wild world. And I'm really, really grateful for your commitment and still going at that. And even from there, taking time to be here with us and still participating and hopefully sharing some more education with the community.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. So today, our topic is really to discuss the intertwined history of the Black and Brown communities in the Americas. This conversation or the theme for the conversation really came up as I was having a conversation with a Watts resident. And I grew up for just my background, my parents are both from Mexico. They were born in Mexico. I was born here, but I also grew up in East LA and during the 80s and 90s, which is also just a very Mexican culture. So I considered myself fairly familiar with Mexican culture growing up, but it's really been recently where I've started to explore more of the history that I've realized I don't really know much about the roots of our culture. I know very much the main things, but one of the things, as I mentioned, roots, and this was something I had to educate my mother on, was that Africa is recognized as the third cultural root of Mexico. So Mexico is, even by the government, we all know the government is usually the last people to acknowledge some of these things. Even by the government, it is fully acknowledged that the roots of Mexican culture are the Spaniards, the indigenous people, and the African people. And ultimately, the community and the culture of Mexican culture really is a combination of those three. And that to me was something that really took me back because I had only heard of the indigenous and Spanish side of it. Just like in American history, we often ignore the Black part of our history. And right now, there's a lot of different things in media and race is a very, very huge conversation and used in very many different ways, unfortunately, in politics. But for me, it was very impactful in that conversation with that resident to both be in a situation where, why don't we know this information? Why do we not know this about our own culture? Why has this been kept away from us? So that's really where the basis of this dialogue came. And I made a request for an expert or someone who is familiar with the theme. And we have here David Carr. So I don't know if Shakayla, if you have a special question in mind, or if Dave, if you want to kind of share some of the work you've done, because I know you mentioned you teaching English, but kind of approaching it from an ethnic studies point. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I'll defer to Shakayla first if you have a question or.
Oh no, I would love to hear you go first.
Okay. So I actually taught ethnic studies for 4 years, from 2001 to 2004. 04 to 08. I taught ethnic studies at the high school level, and it was kind of a mandatory, quote unquote, mandatory elective for the ninth graders who could read on or above grade level. And so, I got a chance to do this at at a charter high school, Animo Venice Charter High.
Okay.
And I came to that class, or I was asked to teach it, and I jumped at the chance because of the experiences that I had teaching ELD, English Language Development, back in 1993 at Compton High School. Now, I sort of landed at Compton High via the Teach for America program. I sort of got there, was placed there to teach, and I was at a very critical time in the 90s, because that was the time in South LA, Compton, and Watts, and Inglewood, where you saw sort of the kind of the cultural shift in the communities. Those communities had been predominantly African American, and now they were about 50-50, Latino and African American. And Compton made the first jump. So by the time I got to Compton High, they were 60% Latino and 40% African American. And I'd say it was maybe the first month of me sort of walking on the campus and greeting, my students who were all Latino immigrant students. I spoke Spanish. I got the job because I spoke Spanish. They didn't care if I knew how to teach ELD, ESL, and they called it ESL at the time. I admitted to the principal at the time, I don't know how to do this. Like, I student taught for 5 weeks in a regular English class, and he said, it doesn't matter, you speak Spanish. And he just threw me in the room with the keys and the books and said, good luck. So that's layer one of this. Layer two was the fact that month you could feel that there was some sort of tension in the air at the school. I didn't know what it was at the time. I didn't know what was going on, but you could see some of the self-segregation going on. This is a high school that was like 2,500 kids. And you could see a lot of, at lunchtime, the African-American kids were over here, the Latino kids were over here, Latino kids playing soccer, Black kids playing basketball and football, and you weren't seeing a whole lot of intermingling. And then at one point in October, I don't know what started it, but there was just an explosion. And it was the first of like 3 race riots we had at the school. And these were things that lasted maybe, 4 or 5 hours. And if anybody knows anything about Compton High, you know how close it is to 2 entities, the City Hall and the police department, the Compton PD. And yet it took them 4 hours, 5 hours to get folks deployed there to try and bring some semblance of order to the campus. And then, like clockwork, we as adults, after the smoke settles, the dust clears, we would get together. And really, it was a lot of the blame game. They don't speak English. Well, some of us are trying to speak Spanish to them, but they're running and they started it. No, it was them started. It's the Black gangsters that started. No, it's the Latino gangsters that started. So it's all of this stuff. And as I'm sitting there watching this go on back in 93, the question that I posed to myself was like, well, what's the history of these 2 groups? Like, what is the history of these 2 groups? And has it always been this sort of conflict? Has there ever been sort of coalition? Like, what is the general? And so I started this sort of fact-finding mission. I did 2 things. I talked to a Latino teacher who wanted to start a mecha on campus, right? A Chicano student organization on campus. And I said, okay, that's cool. I said, I'll sponsor a Black student union. So I went out of my way to find these, a group of African-American students and say, hey, I want to do this, BSU, we can have, events on campus, we can visit other BSUs, different universities. I said, but all bets are off if we don't, meet with the MECHA at least once a month. And that teacher did the same thing. He said, all right, I'm going to sponsor MECHA, but we got to meet. And so the first couple meetings, it was just over food. Okay. No one, I don't care who you are, no one's turning down free food. All right. Give me a break. I was like, so he and I, we'd get together. Okay. We're going to do these lunches, black-brown lunches with each other, brown bag. Let's go for it. So we buy the food, do all that stuff. Then we started to up the ante a little bit and say, hey, we want to have these on-campus field trips, right? And these on-campus field trips would be, we get a room somewhere on the campus. Again, Compton High, huge space, all right? It used to be a community college. So there were rooms there not being used. We said, all right, we want to get a room, do it on a Friday at the end of the day, and we want to get some guest speakers in here. So I talked to some of my running buddies, telling them what was going on. So we got guys from the Los Angeles Human Relations Commission. Became a good friend of mine. He passed away a couple years ago. His name's Joe Hicks, Joe was a serious civil rights leader in the 60s and 70s in Los Angeles. African-American cat who had strong ties to the Latino community. Also had a guy, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Ruben Martinez. He came by, he wanted to stop by and also talk. And we got the kids together to talk openly and honestly about the tension and about the fact that this was now a Black and brown community and that you're all feeling some of the same issues, that are happening in this community with regards to either violence, with regards to, housing that could be made better, with regards to, more of an infrastructure to bring more businesses to the community. And I said, you guys, you have the power in numbers if you come together, okay, and besiege City Hall. Forget about who the mayor is or what he looks like. That doesn't matter. This is about power now. This is about power. And so, but we were able to find these adults who could talk to kids, high school kids, as adults, as they were. We were the teachers. We were, as much as we were giving them free food and doing all this stuff. You're like, look, you still the guy that can flunk me, or give me, or call my parents, all that stuff. So we realized very quick what we need are some leaders and adults who can really turn kids onto this, who can speak to young people, with a tone and air of respect, and can understand, like, look, like, we know that you're going, and it can listen and say, okay, I'm going to validate some of the tension that's going on here and some of the issues, but also we need to look at the fact that, hey, there's a bigger picture here, okay, and you have a role to play. So while we were doing that, while we were sort of getting these things in motion and pushing this stuff, I was kind of doing my research on my own to find out about just what has this relationship been. And again, it's something that's kind of in the middle. It's never totally been this thing of, holding hands by the fire, singing Kumbaya and Woodstock moment. But it's also never been totally this, like, these peoples have been at war for centuries and they'll continue to be at war. There's always have been sort of a middle ground. And one of the things that I emailed to you, Adrian, is the fact that I think one of the apex of this sort of coalition. Well, the first thing I found out about was that there were Mexican Americans, or at that point Chicanos, who were part of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and that was the African American organization that John Lewis was a part of. Their single sort of issue was getting African Americans and securing them the right to vote in the South, down south. But SNCC had, Mexican Americans who were learning and using the organizing tools that African Americans were using, and were working together within that organization. So that was one instance, where certainly there was some synergy there. Does the synergy break apart at some point? Yes, because at one point Stokely Carmichael becomes the leader of SNCC, and he just decides anybody who's not Black needs to leave. Everybody, because SNCC at the time was integrated with both whites and Chicanos. He basically calls them to leave. The Chicanos leave. They shrug. They say, okay, sounds good. But many of those Chicanos ended up in the Southwest, ended up in Los Angeles and in East LA, and took those tools that they learned, in the South, and put them to use in the Mexican American civil rights movement. And then the apex of this sort of coalition, I believe, was, Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign, where he went out of his way. King went out of his way to say, hey, not only do we need to get out of Vietnam, but we need to create a multiracial army to descend on Washington again. And we're not going to leave until our demands are met. As poor people, we want they had a full list of demands: redistribution of wealth, better schools, an end to police brutality. Schools need to be integrated like now. Stop, dragging your heels on this, get them integrated. But in order to do that, he reached out to Cesar Chavez, Reyes Lopez Tijerina, Rodolfo Corque Gonzalez. Okay, these were the men who represented, different facets of the Chicano civil rights, movement. Chavez was already on a hunger strike. So he was like, I'm going to send delegates to this thing, but I can't be a part of it. But Gonzalez and Tijerina met and broke bread with King and said, yeah. And again, like everybody else, again, remember, sometimes you got to deal with the middle. It wasn't a pie in the sky sort of, oh my goodness, this is going to be great. We're all, hey, no, Reyes and Tijerina were like, hey, we link up with King. Our issues are on the map now. Our issues become mainstream news because they said, when you said civil rights at that time in 67 and 68, that translated as black issues. They said, we link up with this program, which again, they're like, these are great goals. These are the same goals that we have. These are the same, but we link up with this organization at that moment, when people start to say civil rights now, they will say Mexican American. They will say Chicano. They will look at us now, and brown issues and brown pride and so on and so forth. And again, and there were Native Americans part of that, as well as poor whites, as well as a whole Puerto Rican contingent as well. But that, to me, became sort of the fulcrum and the apex of like, wow, like this is something. And again, to Adrian's point, it's something that isn't necessarily taught in most history classes in the United States. It's not something that's discussed. We know January comes around, we look at the March on Washington, the 1963 March on Washington. We all watch footage of the Dream speech. We pat each other on the back and say, well done, this is great. And, we all go home and say, all right, man, we celebrated another King holiday is in the books. But we never really look at, the two things we never really look at are his stance totally and unequivocally against the Vietnam War. The three things: his stance against the Vietnam War, his wanting to wage a war on poverty, and the fact that he was ready, willing, and able to form a coalition with Mexican Americans in order to deal with this thing of economic justice. And then from there are just a lot of other layered examples of when these two groups would come together around specific objectives. Definitely around specific objectives. Doesn't mean it was always pie in the sky, but it certainly helped me when I was in Compton. And then that's some of the stuff that I took to say, this is what's going to be sort of the fulcrum of this ethnic studies class. Because I said, we're going to start off talking about Martin Luther King. And the kids, of course, were like, oh, okay, yeah, man. Dream, 63, black kids, white kid holding hands, and okay, all right. And we did that. I know I'm making fun of it now, but I don't mean to make light of it. And we did all that. We had that going down. But then after that, I told the guy, I said, so I know this is what you know. I go, now we're going to go deeper than this. And for some of them, they were just like, wait, there's more? I was like, well, this was in 63. The man was assassinated in 1968. What else? You don't think he was doing anything? He was just sitting around. He was like, no. I said, okay, well, then let's see, and let's figure this out. And that's when, and I'll be honest, that's when I think the eyes were open and kids were like, okay, this now we're cooking here. Now you're telling me something I'm interested in, because before it was the same stuff I've been hearing since kindergarten, but now we're getting into some grown folk stuff, now this, and again, it was one of those things where, and Adrian, how it goes. Teachers, sometimes the kids hear the teacher talk, and it's the Charlie Brown saying, wah, 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 wah. I keep saying, hey, this is a college prep class. This is a college prep class. And they're like, yeah, but I'm still doing the 63 and the hold the hands and the black girls and white girls. And then when I hit them with the poor people's campaign, they say, okay, now you're talking. Now this is a college prep class. Now I get it. So that's at least the start. That was at least sort of the start of it. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for that very informative history lesson on the civil rights and just kind of some more modern day situation of what happened between black and brown people. Especially, I love the part about you saying how these folks went out and sought King out because they knew that once we linked together and we had that partnership and that unity, that civil rights would be Chicano rights and Latin rights. So I really appreciate that, because that's not something that you learn in school. And as an adult, I'm an avid learner always, because I know that a lot of our history is hidden from us purposely and left out. We get the bare minimum, the basics, the cookie cutter history what they want us to know, and so
Mhm.
that we don't have pride. And that's really especially why we had you on this podcast today, is so that we can discuss some of these things that happen in our shared history and how we can have pride in those things, because I don't think a lot of people understand and know. And in fact, we get a little brief history on Chicano history in like throughout our whole like K through 12, but it's nothing about us together. No civil rights history on Black and Brown unity.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
now it's the time to teach us.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, we're at this point, we're at a critical impasse. Like right before I got on here, obviously I'm, I'm old because I still have my Facebook account and I still check that,
Oh,
regularly. So, all right. I'm sorry, but I
me
still do.
too.
You do. Okay. All right. All right. I'm glad. I feel like I'm the only one.
I'm not a Gen Zer. I'm a
Okay.
millennial. I'm almost.
I feel like everyone's a TikTok generation kid now, and I'm still with Facebook. Anyway, I looked on Facebook, and one of the things that's coming up, there's a resolution coming up August 25th to make ethnic studies a graduation requirement in LA Unified. And I think and I think a lot of it is because of the sea change that we have had with regards to George Floyd, with regards to a lot of things that are going on. But I think that's critical and that's crucial, because as much as we have Common Core and we have this new way that we're teaching people and all this stuff, the bottom line is, usually most American history teachers are just like, I just can't get to all this stuff. Like, I can't get to, like, this stuff sounds great and all this ethnic stuff sounds great, but I got to get to all of this. Now, I don't know who's dictating, except maybe either the principal or the state, hey, you got to do this or else, or you don't get paid, or whatever the or else is and stuff. But if the history teacher can't do it, then you definitely need an ethnic studies teacher in there. And again, it's got to be a class that is taught that is going to, again, in my opinion, that is going to show this is where these different peoples connected. This is where the coalitions began, okay, and started to move people forward. In my opinion, you can't talk about Brown versus the Board of Education without talking about Mendez v. Westminster. Mendez v. Westminster happened 5 years before Brown versus the Board of Education. This was a desegregation case that Thurgood Marshall was watching in Anaheim. When I thought about this, I was like, you guys ever heard of Anaheim? And half the kids, yeah, I know. The other half, not really. I go, this is Disneyland. This is the home of Disneyland.
Right.
Okay? We had to desegregate Disneyland out there for Mexican American students. This little girl, Miss Mendez, was supposed to be going to this school, third grade, right by her home. Okay. And the first words out of the principal's mouth when he saw her was like, "Are you Italian? Like, what are you? Like, what are you?" And he was like, "No, she's Mexican. We're Mexican. We're a Mexican family." They were like, "You can't do that here. You got to go down the street, across the tracks over there." And the parents weren't having it. They just weren't having it. But that decision was something that, again, Thurgood Marshall was watching. Even the lawyers who who were part of the JACL, the Japanese American Citizens League, they were watching that case. And when they won that case in Anaheim, so that girl could go to that school and that Mexican Americans could go to any school they wanted to in the city of Anaheim, Marshall was like, okay, this is one of the cases we have to use in order to desegregate schools in the country. So, and that's, again, another example of how at times, and believe me when I say I'm not trying to make this a competition, but that's one of those things where at times, the Mexican American civil rights movement was a little further along the African American civil rights movement, but we were learning from each other. We were certainly learning from each other. And so that was one instance. Another instance is where, Cesar Chavez saw the power of the boycott with the bus boycott, and also with Filipino farm workers boycotting the picking of grapes until they got a livable wage. And those were the things that Chavez used and said, we will do this. We will use this. And it's always been an interesting synergy. The two men never met each other, but when Chavez won that contract with grape growers, the first telegram of congratulations he got was from Martin Luther King. King sent him a telegram to say, congratulations. This is what it's about, a nonviolent movement to bring about change to your folks. okay, to bring about change to your people. The night king was assassinated. Chavez, the first, telegram that Coretta Scott King got was from Cesar Chavez, was from him to say, this, your husband, has given his life to this country to make it better. And by doing so, taught me how to bring about freedom and justice to the farm workers here who labor hard. So, our hearts are crushed for you. I mean, these are things that I think people need to know. And I just think that people need to understand that even though these guys certainly didn't get a chance to walk into a room together and meet up together, they certainly had a profound amount of respect. And they certainly both sort of learned each other's teachings, and were also learning from the teachings of Gandhi, and in that sort of nonviolent realm. So yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's a lot to say, a lot to learn, but I think, we're sort of headed in this direction where the hope is we're going to see more of this type of curriculum in schools. But it's like you got to demand it, because and I'll stop after I say this. There's always an ebb and flow in America. Sometimes this stuff is just popular, and sometimes it's well, we ain't got no time for that. We ain't got no time for that. I can remember, like, when I was in latter part of high school, going into college, Spike Lee was all the rage, and we had all these movies coming out, these black themed movies, and you had these T-shirts, Black to the Future, Black is Beautiful, all this kind of stuff. And then 2 years later, it all dried up. It all dried up. Then then it was the resurgence again, the Malcolm X T-shirts, and you couldn't walk into a store or a restaurant with half the people wearing Malcolm X hats. After the movie came out, I was like, oh, okay, all right, this seems pretty cool. Multicultural 90s, here we come. Everybody's loving it. And then, 5 years later, but we ain't got time for that. We ain't got time for it. And I remember when I started the ethnic studies class, there were publishers, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be awesome, man. We should publish this, baby. They were coming to me. I was teaching the class. I was like, I got essays to grade. I got all this stuff to create and guest speakers to talk to. But I'm like, all right, sounds good. 2 years later, they're like, you know what? This new thing that's coming out, Common Core, we ain't got time for all this. We ain't got time. We got to get down with some Common Core, bro. So, so I'll see you later. I said, okay, all right. And so now it's back again. And whoever gets up there to speak to LA Unified has got to say, dude, this isn't a trend. This isn't a T-shirt. This isn't a hat. Okay. This is how folks, these are the roads that folks took how to become Americans. This is basically how you became American in the United States. And we didn't do it alone. And there were always allies that we had. And this is a chance to look at, some of the partnerships that were created out of these kind of shared struggles and stuff. So there you have it.
Oh, I completely agree with you, especially on, I actually think when we first kind of ran into each other was probably about 10 years ago, where education was actually a national topic.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with you, where during that time, I remember feeling and communicating, we're only in flavor now. If we don't do something now with this, we may miss out, and we don't know when this is coming back. And I feel very much the same with these times, where not to take anything away from it, because this is our responsibility to make it more, but to not just make it the flavor of the week, where it's like, oh, this is cool this week. This is all we're going to do. It needs to be something that is a foundation of our society. And that's, on our responsibilities, really, to make that to the forefront. So yes, I appreciate everything you mentioned. One of the things I took note of that I really appreciated, and one thing that I really started seeing, because when I was teaching at Gumpers in 2005, similar, the dynamic was already changing, where it was previously an African-American community majority, and it had now recently just quickly shifted. And, having, these conversations of really not understanding, and like you said, a lot of where I would see in the background would potentially be gang or group ties that are more so street.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Rivalries, but because of people tend to self-segregate on similarities in color and culture, or something that you can always ultimately bond to. The gangs tend up being racially divided, and then it very much seems like, they had race wars. And that was, I know, one thing, especially teaching at Gompers, when there was those types of fights and stuff like that, really trying to identify is one issue between two people, and maybe even their groups becoming a bigger issue and being made a bigger issue because people don't understand the context of what is happening.
I mean, it got to the point at Compton High that first year where if, a black kid had accidentally in the auditorium going in to see a presentation, and black kid accidentally steps on a Latino kid's shoe and scuffs his shoe. If you as an adult see that and don't tell both guys, okay, I need you to move along, I need you to take a seat, there was a 60% chance that could set things off. It was a 60%. I mean, that's the type of thing we were dealing with, or vice versa. If a Latino kid just happened to scuff, a black kid's shoe, there was always a look. There was always the look back, like the forward movement. And then you had to be the adult to say, okay, move it along, because, and that's where we were. But again, it was tough. It was tough to get like a group of the educators together to say, okay, look, like we have got to work on this, because you can't teach like that and push the ball forward and try and push the data, make the data go, if you're living on a tinderbox, every time the bell rings for lunch, or every time you have a presentation and stuff, and then you have this sort of thing of, well, Black History Month's coming up. Is there a Latino History Month? Is there this? Is there that? All of that stuff gets thrown into the mix to create. It doesn't necessarily have to create tension, but it does if there is sort of an imbalance, and there is. And one of the things too that was the backdrop of all of this was 93 became one of those years where people will look at that who do this work. People will look at the Black and Latino gang wars, not in South LA or Compton or Watts, but they look at the stuff that was going on in Venice. And they look to that and they say, man, Venice was ground zero for all of this. There were two gangs, the Shoreline Crips and Venice 13. And the stat at one point, the stat was, 19 people wounded, 50 people dead, in 1 month. And the common link was that none of these people I just talked about were gang members. Zero. None of them were gang members. But they were either Black or Latino. So the violence had reached an epic point in Venice where it really didn't matter if you were a gang member or not. It really didn't matter. If you were Black, the Venice 13 was going to tag you. If you were Latino, the Shoreline Crips had your number. And that was it. And more times than not, I'd had, again, white friends who were teachers, again, who taught in South LA but lived in Venice. I'd met like white teachers who had told me, they had been told straight to their face, you the safest thing to be out here. You the safest thing to be. Being white out here right now is the safest thing to be. Don't be Black or Latino at night in this part of it, in Oakwood or this part of Venice, because you are going to get harmed. And I think once it reached that critical mass, which is sad to say, you had a contingent of Black and Latino priests, writers, old school activists, new school activists, former gang members who came together and said, this has got to stop. This has got to, you are affecting it's one thing. I mean, you shouldn't want to affect your own lives this way, but now you're affecting the lives of people that have absolutely nothing to do with this. And this is all along the color line. And these folks were able to get these two gangs together to put together a truce. And that was back in 93, 94. And from what I know, from the guys that I knew that were part of that, it's held on to this day. I mean, it is held on to this day because even they started to realize, man, we're doing a ton of damage. We're just doing a ton of damage to each other. So yeah, man, it was tough. It was definitely tough. So
Yeah, I would like to say that it's much better. We have a few incidents, like on the news, I'll hear something about somebody doing a drive-by with like something other than bullets, like throwing something at somebody
yeah,
walking or kicking over a street vendor's cart or something. So little miscellaneous stuff like that, not compared to what went on in the 90s. I feel a lot safer now. I don't think I would have been able to walk down the street in the 90s, even as a woman. It just seems like a lot more intense, the environment. So I would say that things are a lot better. I know growing up here as a woman, a Black woman, I did not necessarily feel that tension. It was only until actually recently where I noticed those things and like
mm-hmm.
so I'm glad I grew up a little bit of ignorance where
right, exactly.
in the time frame that I grew up in, I guess the 2000s is when I went to school.
Yeah.
So I was good, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good thing, because I think at that point things had calmed down. I think by 2000 you'd seen, like, by 2000 you had a lot of African American residents who were like, I don't know a South LA or a Compton that didn't have a large Latino population. Like, for that, at that point, it was like, this is normal to me. This is why should there be tension? Like, these are my neighbors and stuff. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think that's a good thing. The bad thing was when people, and again, it can be any groups. I mean, there's been tensions between the Armenians and Latinos, in Glendale. There are tensions between all these different groups, and it's always that it's the fear of the unknown, not understanding. Certainly, part of it has always been there's always been a language barrier as well, and so that foments, sort of the fear and the hate. And again, you got one or two things. You can use that fear mongering and that hate, and I feel like we all have been through 3.5 years of that at the top. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, really? Are you kidding me? So you can use it to your advantage in order to keep power and stuff, or you look at it and say, okay, there's an opportunity here again to learn and to bring people together and to say, all right, let's figure this out. Let's ask each other some key questions and let's figure this out.
So. And yeah, I love one of the things too, as was mentioned. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew East LA gang culture. I wasn't going south of the 10. There was no reason for me to go south of the 10 ever. And it was just really that of, there's already enough happening here. I'm not trying to learn a whole nother. I knew I shouldn't buy British Knights when they became popular.
Mm-hmm.
I even knew that in East Los Angeles.
Right.
Other than that, I really wasn't, as informed. So it was just like, I had my borders too, where it was like, okay,
right.
I'm staying. But one of the big things I really want to discuss is it's kind of been mentioned because it was mentioned before, kind of a competition. And oftentimes too, what actually got into this discussion with someone, because I'm a very emotional person, so I get all into these things. And it was, someone was discussing the need to discuss Black and Brown tension, and that this was more so a peer. This was in like the conversation I was having with the resident. Mm-hmm. And for me, when I heard that, it reminded me a lot of the media sound bites of, like Shakayla was saying, like sometimes you'll hear, and I just laughed because of the cat came up and you just saw a paw. But
he right here, y'all.
Yeah, I saw him, but right now it was funny with the paw reach. But how you'll hear and how the media will make potentially gang issues that aren't race related into something that's race related, and how that ultimately gets misunderstood by the youth. And that's one of the big reasons I kind of really wanted to have this discussion as well, is because, as Shakayla was saying, I also see, videos of youth just abusing other people both ways, just because of a difference of color. And this misunderstanding on their part of really what's happening. And going back to like my point of competition before I saw the cat paw, what to me it sounded like when I had first originally sound that, as far as black and brown tension, I immediately thought of the soundbite of black and black crime, or black on black crime, and how we don't ever hear white on white crime. But
Right.
it's the same thing, like, in which the background statistic is not that surface statistic that we're trying to focus on for the sound bit. It's the bigger issue that people tend to harm those in their proximity. So people in their proximity tend to be, tend to self-segregate. So of course, if your neighbors are mostly white and you're white, you're gonna have white on white crime.
Right, exactly.
Proximity. And it was so very similar thing as when I thought of black and brown tension. I really stepped back and ultimately thought of, it's really, again, a competition for lack of resources in a lot of the situations. A lot of both communities oftentimes are neglected and abused one way or another systemically. And like you mentioned, sometimes one of the groups may be pandered to by leaderships or political parties more than another. And that's where I see like them. And when I say them, like people in power and media or things like that, that's when I really see the push of trying to make us enemies and compete for virtually scraps while they get to eat the meals up top, and we ultimately fight amongst each other.
Yeah, I mean, there again, you know, the media loves a good story, and if they can dress it up into something that they think is quote unquote sexy, black and brown tension, black on black crime, you know, that's the way they're going to run with it. Sadly enough, because we live in an age of Twitter and all this other stuff and Instagram and stuff, anybody can be a media representative now, you know, without much education on anything. Right. And it's very scary. It's very, very scary. So I think, it's always a layered sort of thing. So has there, like I said, has there been Black and Latino tension in these neighborhoods in LA or in Texas or New York, you know, with the African-American and Puerto Rican community? Yes. I mean, there has been, you know, and at times, is it because of this sort of this thing of a competition for resources? Yeah. I mean, going back to way back to the days of, you know, when the NAACP first started, and then all of a sudden in the sort of the 50s, you had, you know, LULAC, and you had, you know, the GI Bill, which definitely supported a lot of Mexican Americans. There was this thought in the Mexican American community to say, hey, you know, like, you know, this group, this darker skinned group, they're catching hell out here in the United States. You know, like our goal maybe is to maybe not sort of get together with them, and let's maybe do our own thing. You know, let's maybe do our own thing, because they're catching it. And meanwhile, for many in the NAACP, you know, and some African-American organizations, or I'll call out the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Martin Luther King's organization. There were certainly people, rank and file in the organization, that pulled King aside and said, hey, look, it sounds like with this poor people's thing, you're trying to make these folks, these Chicano folks, equal in this partnership. You're trying to make them, and King was like, well, yeah, of course. And they were like, they ain't equal. We've been the ones, you know, spearheading this movement. We've been the ones catching hell. We've been the ones winning this, you know, for America. They got to walk behind us. And King was like, that's not happening. He's like, that's not that, because again, he was like, that's not true leadership, and that's not what we want to have happen in something like this. So yeah, I would say so that basically says, yes, has there been sort of tension? Yes. Not the surface area media, like, ooh, look at this, you know, these folks are at each other's throats. But yeah, but more so sort of the thing of, because you're right, you know, the country now, even as we speak now, is certainly pandering towards, you know, African Americans in a way that I've never seen. I mean, I you know, there's been a month where I've gotten whiplash looking at all the things that have changed. Cops, that show was canceled after like 50 years of being on the, you know, and then there was another thing I'd never seen, Live PD, boom, that got canceled. I was like, okay, here we go. You know, nobody wants to run the Dukes of Hazzard anymore because of the Stars and Bars. They're like, get that, you know, show up, you know, and it's just been like, my God, you know, like, okay, I get it. But at that point, that's when you say, okay, so what are some of the underlying issues that are still happening that you can't just cancel just like that you can't just take away? And who else is on the receiving end of these awful issues? Who else is that? And that's where I think, again, real leadership and true leadership steps up to the plate and says, all right, we want these things to happen, these things to change, but we're not the only ones that are suffering because of it, you know? So while the tension will always be, and there is this competition. Well, what are they getting? Well, we want some of that. We don't want to be the back end of the dog. We want to be up front, you know, with the dog, you know, where the dog's head is. We want to do that. Okay, there is this thing, but again, there's always this thing of like, well, we're gonna meet these challenges head on as partners. I mean, one of the and I should have saved it and tried to broadcast it here, but you know, I'd probably wreck this whole show because I'm still dealing with technology and all this other nonsense. But one of the coolest things I've seen, you know, in a lot of the George Floyd protests were, you know, two women, one African American, one Latina. The Latina protester is holding a sign saying Black Lives Matter. All right. The African American woman is holding a sign saying, stop putting our kids in cages. Okay. Now, these are two different issues, okay? One resonating with the African-American community, one resonating with the Latino community, but you have the juxtaposition of both. So these two women understood that, like, yeah, these are issues that can unite us, okay? And that we got to fight for both of these things. We got to make sure that this is happening. And I think that more of that, if we can see more of that, it'll go a long way, moving and proving to folks that, hey, there is a serious coalition to be had here by these people.
Yes, I absolutely agree to not have that crabs in the barrel mindset in combating these kinds of issues. It's scary when we're united, and that's what they don't want. They don't want us to unite and be. You're better when you have your village, and we're all human at the end of the day. And you have other members in your village that have other skill sets and other cultural experience, but together you guys can really be a force. That's not what they want. And so that's what we're here to do, is to say that we're in this together. And for example, I know you mentioned Facebook earlier, but I still have Facebook. I'm 28.
That's good. I'm glad I'm not alone. I'm
28 and Facebook for millennials. I'm a businesswoman and entrepreneur and stuff like that. I'm in different Facebook groups. It's essential for a person like myself. If you're not on Facebook utilizing those groups and stuff, then you're not really doing it. So that's just a part of social media. So Facebook is that. So anyway, right on. But with that being said, when I see these matters online, I share them as well, not just Black issues. My heart still is like torn when I see kids in cages, because at the end of the day, they're still children. They're still covered in foil blankets, and I just can't comprehend that. I wouldn't want that for anybody in the world. And I feel like I have enough love in my heart to carry both issues. It's not a pick one over the other. It's like it's all bad, and we all have to fight together to combat it.
Yeah. Agreed, without a doubt, man. And again, only good things can happen when, you know, you have that sense of unity, that sense of pride. Only good things can happen, you know. And again, you know, when you talk to a lot of, like, a couple of my old professors, you know, who happen to be Latino, you know, when they were growing up back in the day, they're like, dude, our hero, he's like, one guy was like, I can't speak for all Chicanos. He's like, but my heroes were Black growing up. He's like, guys like Muhammad Ali, you know, Miles Davis, Jimi Hendrix, like, these were the guys, the men I looked up to, man. He's like, and then those guys got me into looking at my own culture and my own, and, you know, and my own history. And I said, you're absolutely right. I said, I get it. When I started finally learning about guys like Jorge Gonzalez or Reyes Tijerina and all this kind of stuff. Then I started to backtrack again and say, like, a lot of this guy, a lot of what Reyes is talking about, he sounds like Malcolm X. I was like, he's a hardcore, and I would look and see, yeah, this is where they're finding this sort of synergy, from each other. The author that I think almost every English teacher has used his book, or ethnic studies teacher, Luis Rodriguez, Always Running. Right? This is a book that is used in a ton of classrooms. When I finally got to meet the man, like he said, like, yeah, you see in the book, I tell you what happened in the 60s. I go to this coffee shop, we're hanging out, and we're talking about the politics of East LA. He said, we're talking about the politics of East LA, but we're using, the autobiography of Malcolm X to school us in this. We're looking at that. We're looking at, what the Black Panthers were doing, in South LA. We're looking at what they were doing in Oakland. And we're saying, okay, this is what they're doing. These are the victories that they're winning. It's the same kind of garbage that they're going through, that we're going through. So yeah, let's try and do this. Let's try and figure out how you do this. And then you say, because they see this kind of synergy. Only good things can happen when you finally bring these folks together. And yeah, and the powers that be get freaked out. I mean, I think one of the, to be honest, I mean, and I was looking at this on the news, on local news, and I happened to be in Orange County, like one of the weeks where the George Floyd protests were up in arms. Like, I think the thing that freaked the people out most is to see so many white people out there with signs saying, like Black Lives Matter. And George, I was like, they know what to do when we're out there. If it's just Black folks, they know what to do. Okay, all right. And someone get on the phone and, call Al, call Jesse. Let's see what we can do and let's appease these guys. They don't know what to do when you get a multiracial army talking about, we want to see some justice, man. We want to see some justice. I know that the dude didn't look like me. I don't care. I don't want that happening to anybody. I want to see some justice. We want to see this now. We want to see this now. So, only good things can happen. I know I keep saying it, but it's the truth.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I do want to share a moment that I kind of had with that. And a lot of this too is, for me, a lot of this education, before I forget, and I know Malcolm X is often radicalized where he's this extremist and stuff, but even I know very much in his later days, he was very much about uniting with different cultures and being about that, because he understood too that if we're just a lot stronger together.
Yeah,
we're really just wasting a lot of energy when we're fighting for each other and fighting with each other. And it should be equally as disgusting to have children in cages and, bodies being murdered, children being murdered. We can care for both. And that's where really it's ultimately about stopping just looking at the incidents on the surface level and try to find what is the key thing that are leading to both of them. Where's the systemic issues that are leading to both of these situations to come up? One of the stories I wanted to share was I participated in one protest. I've been staying in for the pandemic as I have older parents, but I really needed to get out there, after the incident with George Floyd. And one of the most powerful moments for me, in which I even got emotional, was an older African-American gentleman joined the protest later on. And we were just on the sidewalk and we were in Palos Verdes.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, and right outside the Trump golf course. So right outside
you're close to my hood right there. I'm in San Pedro, man. So that's close to my hood. I know where that's at.
So we were having, we were all just lined up there, had our protest, and this gentleman came with a younger I believe it was his daughter, and at one moment I saw them having a conversation where you could see him getting emotional, and then there was one point where we all had our fist up, and he had his fist up with a huge smile, and he came towards the end when we had already dispersed a little bit, so I wanted to show him the picture of what we were like when we were at full capacity. Mm-hmm. And when I showed him, I go, I just wanted you to see. He goes like, this is something different. And he goes like, I'm just inspired by seeing so much youth and so many people of all cultures here. I haven't seen that before. Whereas like, I was in this fight, for years. I'm still in this fight, as an older Black man in America. But you know, the fight, but seeing so many youth out there and them really fighting for each other is really also too where I get a lot of my inspiration and why I believe education like this is important, so that some of those youth don't get distracted by that external narrative and go into this kind of idea that we need to fight each other versus we're just a lot stronger together. Yeah. That's the reality, and that scares people in power.
So one thing I want to throw at you about Malcolm X, you're right. I mean, again, pendulum goes back and forth with Malcolm X. Again, one of these hidden moments in history that really, I mean, it's a shame and it does a disservice to us. But, you know, Malcolm, after leaving, he's kind of 1 foot in the Nation of Islam, 1 foot out. He's on a picket line. Okay, Malcolm X is on a picket line with members of the Nation of Islam and Black and Puerto Rican construction workers in New York. He's fighting for livable wages for these construction workers. He gets thrown in jail, all right, with these guys. He's waiting to be bailed out. This tiny woman walks up to him. She is neither Black, white, or Puerto Rican. Okay, she's a Japanese-American woman named Yuri Kochiyama. Yuri Kochiyama comes up to Malcolm X and says, "You are an amazing leader. You're a dynamic speaker and an amazing leader. But when you call all whites blue-eyed, blonde-eyed devils, you miss the point of what this, battle is about." And she was like, "And it's a shame because you're pretty amazing." Now, most of the people in the jail kind of know who Malcolm X is, and I think they were waiting for him to just go off on this woman because they were like, everyone else was kind of a little afraid to talk to this guy. He gets bailed out. She gets bailed out. He starts talking to her. She starts talking to him. They become the best of friends. Yuri Kochiyama, she was interned as a little girl during the time of Japanese internment. She got out, right? That sort of experience not only scarred her for life, but then showed her that, like, hey, at the end of the day, man, there's going to be a point where you got to fight for your freedom. You got to fight for other people's freedom. So she moved. I can't remember where she was originally from, but she moved her family, her husband and her 2 kids, to the Bronx, Brooklyn, New York. She sent her kids down south. Okay, they weren't doing no spring break at Daytona and all this other stuff. She sent them down south to register Blacks to vote because she said this is where our struggle needs to be right now. These are the people who are catching hell. And she became friends with Malcolm X. She was one of the people who put the bug in his ear. You got to leave this guy. You got to leave the nation. You got to do your own thing. And when the world opens up again after this pandemic, I urge us, all 3 of us, to go to the Japanese American National Museum. You will see a life-size portrait of the photograph from Life magazine of Yuri Kochiyama holding Malcolm X in her arms as he dies. When he was shot and assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom, when the shots rang out, everybody moved back. And understandably so. Shots ring out, shit, I'm moving, I'm diving under his seat too. Yuri Kochiyama was the only one who moved forward to protect him. He falls in her arms, and there happens to be a photographer there, and he snaps this picture, at the moment of this unknown Japanese-American woman who cradled this guy in her arms when he passed away. I mean, and again, most people don't know. I mean, the few Japanese people who I knew who knew her, they were like, yeah, like she's, my parents told me she was a kook. This woman was nuts. I was like, no, she's not nuts. I was like, this woman is a civil rights hero. She is a civil rights hero, fighting for the rights of not only Japanese Americans, Black Americans, and all Americans. And she was a confidant of Malcolm X. We never got that was one of the criticisms, and there weren't very many criticisms of Spike Lee's movie, but one of the criticisms that did rise to the surface was that you never depicted this friendship. You never had this friendship in there, and that friendship could have gone a long way to teach people about the true humanity of this man. I mean, certainly once he leaves the nation and he breaks bread with white Muslims and all that kind of stuff, you get to see that. You understand that. But to have this woman in his face, wagging her finger in his face, and him to really listen and to say, okay, we're going to become friends, and to invite each other over for dinner, for lunch, to hang out with their kids and all that stuff, and for them to have that common bond until ultimately he dies in her arms. And that's huge. That's an American story, man.
Yeah.
That is an American story, and that needs to be told. As far as that's, again, it's my opinion. That needs to be told. So.
No, and thank you. I didn't know it. I didn't know that story.
Yeah.
I had a clue about that story too, and that just speaks to what you were saying about people's humanity. Like when you meet someone new, you never supposed to feel like you're superior to them, because every person that you meet is an opportunity to grow and learn from them, because you never know what another person knows. And that's how he felt in that moment. This lady, I imagine that he was like, I'm gonna listen because she has wisdom.
Right,
exactly. She ain't no punk. She ain't afraid to talk. Let me actually.
That's probably what he was saying. He's like, okay.
Yeah. And they formed this beautiful bond because he just let down his guard and didn't have his ego about talking to other people. And that's what I like to tell people. It's like, you never know what you will learn from the next person, because everybody has life experiences.
Exactly.
You get to learn from people as well, from books and stuff, but that's another way of learning. And because of that, he had this other perspective that actually helped him galvanize him leaving the movement, which is crazy to me because I did not know this until you just said that.
Right. She was one of the ones. She was one of the ones. And again, like I said, there were people who were part of the movement who, again, obviously when that movie came, because you didn't know if the movie was gonna get made, and there wasn't enough money, and then finally there was enough money and all that stuff. So a lot of people were kind of like, look, let's just be happy this damn thing is out and was made. But definitely there were people who were there who knew of that friendship, who after a while, maybe a month or two it was out, came up and just said, okay, here's my one and only criticism of this. Mm-hmm. This story should have been told. And to be honest, it should have been told, because if we don't tell these stories, nobody else will. I mean, nobody else will. I hate to put it, the guy who runs the history department over at Houghton Mifflin Publishing, K through 12 Houghton, and publishing their history books, he ain't sitting around going, you know what, we should talk about Yuri Kochiyama's friendship with Malcolm X. I think that would be kind of cool for kids to see. Like that just ain't happening, like that. What was the other one? The other one I used to deal with, the history publishers at Heinley and Heinley aren't sitting back and going, what would be cool if we talked about how Martin Luther King started that Poor People's Campaign, hated the Vietnam War, and got together with these Chicano activists. There you go. That would get kids, jump. I mean, it gets me excited. Yeah. But these are conversations they ain't have. They're not even entertaining something like that. It's just not. So if we don't do it, it just ain't gonna get done, man. It's just I don't know, man. That's how, at least at the top, you have to be the one at the bottom going, hey, man, you need to do this. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to publish and stuff. So, yeah. We got to do it.
Yeah, and something, especially as you're mentioning, if we don't do it, no one will. And one of the things I also really wanted to cover that has become more and more apparent, something I've always known within this country, and I even knew within the Mexican culture, but really even more so, is colorism. And that whole idea of even amongst us in the Latinx community, we're of all colors. we have the whole range, and within our culture, there's still a lot of things that we do to reinforce those prejudices and things like that. And one of the stories I'll share as to why I always knew that was part of the story, but this is a lot of what ultimately motivates me to really provide these different types of history, is my grandmother, born in Mexico, was born to a Spanish woman and an indigenous man. And the Spanish woman married the indigenous man, my great-grandfather, because my great-grandfather had the land, and it was when the land was being dispersed. And, well, I'll mention this part later, was being dispersed, and the best way for her to inherit land was to marry an indigenous person with land. In that, they had, and that's why I don't even know, because there were like 4 or 5 children, However, only one of them came out looking indigenous, which was my grandmother.
Okay.
And all her siblings were provided school. Most, I believe they became lawyers and doctors, or all professionals. They lived within the house. My grandmother was forced to live with the house help. She was denied all education. Her own mother would beat her, threw battery acid in her face, even hung her from the barn, in which it was the house help that brought her down. And my mother grew up seeing a burn mark in her mother's neck from a noose when she was hung by her own mother because she was born too dark for her. Yeah. And from what I knew, my grandmother passed away completely illiterate, would sign her name with an X, would give all her money over to when she'd pay for things, and just hope, but was just such a loving woman. And when she passed away, the community really came out. And she's been one of the ones where I talk to, even recently, where, you know, talking to my mom about these things and these issues being so important for me. My grandmother passed away when I was 7, so I never really had a relationship with her, and she was in Mexico. So I never really got to know her. I learned of her story. But one of the things my mother even told me was one day when an African-American woman got on the bus and was older than my grandmother, and was told by the bus driver to go to the back. And my grandmother stopped her with my mother, and my mother had a twin, so there was with 2 children, and my grandmother took herself and the 2 children to the back of the bus and told the woman, "Please sit down. You do not deserve to go back to the bus. I can go back to the bus. I'm younger." And that was still a lot of that spirit, and why a lot of this education for me is so important, because I personally get a lot of strength from remembering my grandmother's story, because it was literally one generation away where my mother would have been wealthy if her mother was lighter skinned. We grew up in poverty because in my lineage, someone was born too dark for their own family. But I gained a lot of power ultimately from understanding that my grandmother did, within her limitations, everything she could and became an amazing human being, to then pass that down to my mother, who then passed it down to me to allow me these privileges that ultimately I was born with. And that's one of the real things that in learning this and coming up with this in this discussion, there's a Mexican president by Vicente Guerrero. Mm-hmm. And if you see images of him, he looks a lot lighter skinned than he really was. And again, this is how they change history. He was more in the indigenous, but more so an African man in Latin America, and did great things. And ultimately, again, we don't hear as much of them because they like to hide the story. But one of the things that I found really remarkable in the history of Mexico is the involvement with the Underground Railroads and freed and escaped slaves, and how part of the Underground Railroads in the United States led to Mexico, and Mexico was allowing freed or escaped slaves to become citizens, but was also using its army to protect them from slave owners who wanted to cross the border and take them back. And that to me was very, very powerful in recognizing just our struggle together, that here was this man within this one culture, and he saw the bias within his own culture, and really took that love for his people, all people, and included that really and extended that to others. And where this is, you know, that huge fight. And I know I personally got a lot of strength in learning that story, because then that's where I start seeing I need to not allow myself to be brainwashed by the images that I'm sold, in the sense that the images of him, he looks more Spanish. Of course he would look more Spanish, you know, because that's who they wanted as heroes.
Like you said, Mr. Carr, 1829 is when they abolished slavery in Mexico. which is 34 years before Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. So
There you
like
go.
you said, Mexican history is in fact, civil rights were ahead of us, and we actually learned from them.
Right.
We got protection. So I am
There you go.
extremely grateful for knowing that, but I did not know that growing up, and that's just like a disadvantage for everybody who lives amongst each other. Like, we don't know about our history like we should, and we're missing a lot of very pertinent information that could unite us.
It's true. I mean, we again, during this sea change, we've heard about, how much people, didn't know about, the Tulsa, massacre. They didn't know about, Juneteenth. We have a president who wanted to hold a rally on June 19th in Tulsa. I mean, it's just like, it's like an SNL skit gone wrong. It's just like, are you kidding me? But again, but that opens the door up to say, there's so much about our histories that we just don't know, and it's not our fault, because again, it's like when the winner gets to tell the story, no matter what it is. The winner gets to tell the story, so when you're in power, when you win, you get to, until you have, again, an army of folks saying, hey, there's a part of the story you are leaving, there's a critical part of these stories you consistently leave out. Definitely leave out. And again, Adrian, to your point, your story was amazing. And yeah, like I said, these are the things these are the real things. I mean, if you're going to talk about real tension, within these two groups, then yeah, let's get away from the media surface tension. And then yes, let's talk about like how, when back in the day, I mean, I don't know if it happens now, but back in the day, when a kid was born, a Puerto Rican kid is born on the East Coast, sometimes the grandmother, the grandfather, the first thing out of their mouth would be like, hey, ¿qué tipo de pelo? Huh? Pelo bueno, pelo malo. Does he have good hair or bad hair? All right. The bad hair is the one that's curly, look African. All right. The good hair, make it straight, make it straight. I mean, but those are things that happen. Yeah, those are things that get said. Yeah, they're definitely the colorism stuff. On the other side of the coin, yeah, I would, especially when I was teaching, in Compton, and at some points also when I was teaching in Long Beach, it was like, yeah, sometimes you had to sit down with, sometimes it was a African American kid, sometimes an African American educator standing right next door to me. Say, okay, not all these kids right here are Mexican. Not all these kids are, you got some that are from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, at some point when they heard me speak Spanish, people thought I was, are you Mexican? I was like, no, I'm not Mexican. I was like, no, I was born in the United States. I was just like, but I know the language. I studied the language like a lot of folks do, in high school and college and stuff. But so there's always this sort of thing that, I mean, we live in a society where, look, man, like, I don't want to have to get up and turn my TV on. I want a remote control. And this remote control type of mindset permeates everything, including race. I want to be able to put you in a box and categorize you. And I want to already know about you, because I don't know that I have the time to learn about you. It used to be when I was growing up, it was like, hey, you're the MTV generation. Then it became like the Facebook generation, I guess. Now it's like the TikTok generation. I only got like 5 seconds to deal with you. So I'm going to look at you, I'm going to figure out what you are, and then I'm going to move along. And that's just not Black and Latino. That's everybody, man. That's everybody in the country. I was like, and if we want to see the changes that need to be made, that are happening here, then we got to stop and say, hey, this is going to have to take some time. This is going to take some time, because there's a lot of great history out there that helped really shape and build this country. And too many people don't know about it. I have a friend of mine who works with the superintendent in Colorado, and they were having this same kind of discussion, and they don't know how to He was like, yeah, we were trying to have a discussion on race. We don't know how to go about it. We're fiddling our thumbs. We don't know. And I'm saying, you don't know. I was like, where are you having this discussion? He was like, in this part of Denver. I was like, you having it in Denver? I was like, yeah. Denver was the birthplace of the Crusade for Justice, man. That was Corey Gonzalez's civil rights organization. It was right there. You right there. You a stone's throw away. I was like, start it there. Started saying you're going to finish, his work that he left for you, And again, same type of thing. Oh, really? I kind of just quickly Googled him. He seems kind of militant. I was like, who cares? I was like, who cares? I was just like, I'm not telling you to go arm yourself. I'm saying that there is a space where you can start from. Start from there. Because it's not like, sometimes people act like, well, I don't have a starting point. I don't have a starting point, but you do. You just don't know it, man. Like you just don't know it because you're going with the same sort of history that we've all been kind of spoon fed. You got a spoon. This is what it is, and so and again, it's he who wins gets to tell the story. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. He who wins gets to tell the story. All right. The Rams lost the Super Bowl. You never heard from the Rams. They lost the Super Bowl, came back to LA, went back to their collective homes, probably got their drink on and tried to forget that whole Super Bowl. The team to beat them, they got to talk all day long about how they whipped up on the Rams and became Super Bowl champs. That's the way it is. The bottom line is we have to let folks know that there's a history here that helped build this country, and we are champions too. We are champions too, and that's the bottom line. So.
I completely agree.
Yes, I completely agree. I am so excited about this discussion because I was telling Adrian beforehand, like, it'll be fine. It'll be okay. It'll be we're going to learn a lot of things that we didn't know, and it'll go great. Just having a conversation between folks and learning and picking each other's mind and figuring out what's going on in our history is ultimately what we're all trying to figure out so that we can learn from that history and forge a plan to make things better.
So I promise you, I get absolutely zero money when I throw this book at you. But I think this is, for me, this was a big help for me in creating the ethnic studies class. And I suggest it to anybody looking at this stuff. So it's called The Struggle in Black and Brown. It's written by a bunch of different authors, including one of my professors. So he might get some money, but I'm not. And again, he didn't tell me, he doesn't know anything about this. So there you go. But it is a great book, and a lot of it outlines a lot of the stuff that I used, to teach, in the ethnic studies class. And I'm still a lifelong learner. I still have a lot to learn about public education and teaching. So I don't, toot my own horn much, but sadly, it's always when something happens in society or when there's a breakdown again. I hear from my old students who are now, starting their own families, man. They're in their late 20s, early 30s, and they will email me and they will say, this is the same thing we were studying. I can't believe it's still happening. This is what's up. Or just out of the blue, randomly. I remember when a lot of them first went to college and stuff, they were just like, yeah, I was taking this, this Black studies class or this Latino studies class or this ethnic studies class, but the professor wasn't talking to us about the coalitions, man. They weren't talking to us about the unity. They weren't talking. So I had to disrupt the class, man. And I had to say, you're forgetting all this stuff. I said, good for you. I said, good for you. I said, maybe, hopefully, I said, he or she is a professor, so hopefully they know this stuff. I was like, but if they don't, then yeah, let them know. Let he or she know this is important too. It's just as important as whatever you're running down in that classroom. I'm not saying what you're saying ain't important. I'm saying this is important too. And every student in the U.S. needs to know this stuff. Definitely.
Yes, and I agree because, like you were saying, it's intentional that we don't know some of these things.
Yeah, of course.
Most of these things.
And like one of the things that I know I get into because very theme, like I'm personally inspired a lot by the Black Panthers. And when we're discussing what like community policing looks like and things like that, I'll mention them and they'll be like, oh, you're also radical and things. I was like, how much do you actually know about them?
Right? How much
You know, it's just,
Yeah. Mhm.
No,
and it's always that. It's like they only know what the media has told them about the Black Panthers and
exactly.
that image, and not actually what the work they were doing and why they were such a threat to the nation, as far as because of how organized and all the work of supporting women and children that they were doing.
I mean, the thing with the Panthers, it's always about the leather jackets, the berets, and the guns.
Mhm.
That's the image. Okay, well, first of all, in terms of the guns, the law was it didn't matter who you were. You know, you could drive around in California with a loaded gun in your car. Okay, you could. The only time they made it illegal is when the Panthers started doing it, and they because they started these patrols to ensure that that the police didn't go above the law. And the other thing that they drove around with that, again, people don't like to talk about, it was like they had law books. So they would recite the law. So they came. Yes, did they have a semi-automatic strapped to it? Yes, but again, it was legal. It was legal to do so. But they also in their hands there were these law books that they said, okay, this is penal code right here, and this is what we're trying to do. Why are you stopping us from doing this? Because that's against the law. Yeah. So that became frustrating to everybody. And then once this, I think it was an act called the Mulford Act, came into fruition in California, where it would impede folks from driving around with guns. That's when the Panthers said, oh no, we're going to march to City Hall in Sacramento, and we're gonna try and lay our claim. And they did this in front of Ronald Reagan. They did this right in front of Ronald Reagan, sitting there hanging out with these kids, and all of a sudden, the Panthers show up. But no one talks about the fact that, hey, these guys had law books. Hey, these guys were serving free breakfast and free lunch before that was a thing in LA Unified, before, everybody needs, a breakfast program now, but they were the ones who initiated that. Some could lay a claim. It might be, some would say this is a stretch, but you could say that they were the first ones to come up with this idea of a charter school, because they had these things called freedom schools, where they said, well, you're not getting our history taught to you at this school, so we will set up a school where you can get our history, and then you can intersperse it over there. You can do that. And again, they inspired groups like AIM, the American Indian Movement, the Brown Berets in East LA, the Young Lords, who were Puerto Ricans on the East Coast, the Red Dragon, who were Chinese, American radicals in San Francisco, and even the Young Patriots. And again, believe me, I get no money from this, but PBS 2 months ago, if you go on the PBS website, punch in, Black Panther Party and Young Patriots, there is an amazing documentary on the Black Panther Party in Chicago and the creation of the first Rainbow Coalition. It's created by the Panthers, the Young Lords, and these young white radicals who had migrated from the South into Chicago, and they called themselves the Young Patriots. And believe it or not, the film footage is amazing, if not for anything, because you see these young white cats, poor working class white guys, jean jackets on, okay, with patches on their jean jackets of the stars and bars right next to Black Panther Party buttons, all power to all people, all that kind of stuff. And they said they used the stars and bars to say, like, we are trying to rebel against this society that's trying to divide us from everybody else. And once they coalesced with the Panthers, one of the things they decided as an organization is, okay, we are going to retire the Young Patriots' use of the Confederate flag, because we understand, that they came to that understanding. We understand that this can be seen as offensive to African Americans. Meanwhile, the running joke was the Black Panther member who came to the Young Patriots to create this coalition, his name was Bobby. His name was Bobby Lee, but his full name was Robert E. Lee. And the people were like, the Young Patriots, he's like, your name is Robert E. Lee? He's like, yeah. They were just kind of like, man, that's like being a Jewish kid named Hitler. Like, how'd you get that name? And he was just like, they was like, I don't know. He's like, my last name's Lee, and my parents named me Robert, man. I guess they didn't know he was after that, some Confederate dude. He's like, but again, that whole, and you see the beginning of that coalition. You see how they were coming together around specific issues, and then you see the fear that they put in the mayor and the police chief, not being violent, not being doing any of that stuff, but you see the fear of them demonstrating and being articulate and saying, this is what we all want. This is what we all want. You see the Black Panthers standing up for these guys and the Young Patriots, and they were just like, yeah, the mayor and the police chief calling these cats hillbillies. They said they got straight up calling these like these are men and women who live in Chicago, man. These are Americans, man. These are Americans, period. And I think that, you say that well, the Panthers, people said that, the Panthers are radical. I think the most radical thing you can do right now in 2020 as a person of color is to stand up in front of whoever it is and say, hey, Jack, I'm an American. I am an American, and I deserve to be treated as such. Okay, given full rights as an American, given all of the things. And when I see things that are coming at me that I claim are un-American, I have the right to speak out against it. Period, man. Period. So that's what it's about.
Right. No, yeah, I completely agree. That was such a great sentence that I forgot my point, because it's just, yeah. I just thought of that.
I would say check out that documentary on TV.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask. What was the documentary again?
So I can't remember. I'll have to email it to you offline.
Okay.
But I can't remember the name of it. But it really does. It was new. I don't know. Like, again, I think people are just doing everything and anything they can at this moment. And this was like a documentary that I guess had been in the works for years, and PBS Online premiered it 2 months ago. But again, and I know I'm biased, but I think it should be shown in every high school classroom in the country. I was like, you want to understand, what's really going on right now. We want to look to the past. You got to look to the past. You got to see this stuff. But I'll definitely hit you with it offline, because it is, and everybody that's depicted in it, for the most part, the majority are still around today, and they're still around. And so you see them sort of taking on some of the issues that we're dealing with right now. So, which is cool. And again, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they're like, yeah, I still can't believe we're fighting this. But on the other hand, kind of to your point, where the experience you had at the Trump golf course, a lot of them are saying it's beautiful to see these young people out and such a multiracial, a multi-ethnic thing. And so they're like saying, man, our work wasn't done in vain.
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate being able to do this. And this ultimately, so we're a wellness channel. So we always want to bring it back on all that. And how does this ultimately relate to wellness? And this was something, as we were discussing, we're also doing this program called the Community Resiliency Model that we've also been pushing out. And it's very much about being able to be your best self under traumatic situations and stressful situations.
Oh, yeah.
But with this, what we're hoping to do is we are living through a very stressful situation. And there is just a lot of misinformation out in the world right now that us as a channel, we're really trying to provide accurate information that can be useful for the community. And as I mentioned, there was a community member that actually, in a conversation with a community member where this actually came about, in which more people should know these things. And we completely agreed. And a lot of this, what we're hoping, as people learn more about these histories, and we're gonna, hopefully we'll be able to provide a link to the documentary in our description. We'll also try to include some other information, as this is something we want to continue building upon. So building upon that history.
Yep.
And we'll share, but a lot of this is really under the idea that you can listen and learn about your history and feel powerful with your history, and not just the history that's been sold, where just tells us the suffering and the different parts that we've endured. That is also part of our history, but there is so much of our history that shows strength and resilience and unity that is intentionally kept from us. And that for us as a channel and as a group is wellness for us, because if we are working together and we're supporting each other as a village, as a people, all together, at the end of the day, all of us want what's best for the kids, and that's how we'll get it. is by working together so that the kids can grow up in a different environment.
Yeah. Without a doubt, man. Without a doubt. You're right. I mean, we're living through a very traumatic time. Even former First Lady Michelle Obama said that all of this has given her sort of a low-grade form of depression, as she deals with this and stuff. And I think everybody's feeling it, and it manifests itself in different ways. So whatever way you can sort of take care of yourself, and we take care of each other, I think we'll be all the better for it, to really sort of understand where each other's coming from, and to really support each other, through the tough times, and then to support each other through the good times as well, and definitely, I think it's important.
Right.
I agree, and I want to thank you for joining us today and dropping some knowledge on us, some much needed knowledge. I learned so much, and I just have so much pride, and that's exactly what everybody should have and what everybody should be learning at any stage in life, just our history in general, and how that can make you feel like you want to go out there and get it,
Exactly. Well, thank you guys. Again, I'm very, very honored, very humbled to be asked to be part of this. So thank you guys very much. It's been a great experience for me. So definitely.
Awesome.
It's helped me get through some of the craziness that we've been experiencing in 2020. So thank you.
I'm glad. Yes, thank you, and I'm super excited to get this out into the community for sure.
All right. Cool, man. Yeah, let me know, and I'll email you the link to the documentary. I swear.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Let me do a quick ending or whatever, and then So just as we're closing up, just want to thank everybody again for being here. Thank you once again, Dave, for all the information that you shared. Hopefully you found something useful. Again, we're going to be providing more information as we continue. So if you heard something that inspired you, please share with us, comment on these things, share with us so we can share with each other. The more we know, the stronger we will be. And that's really kind of the whole concept about this wellness channel, is really just being informed so that we can take care of ourselves and each other. So thank you so much. We appreciate you all, and we will be seeing you again soon, hopefully.
Thank you. All right, guys. Thanks a lot, Shakayla. Thank you, Adrian. Muchísimas gracias. All right.